The wind carried a low, haunting whistle through the dry brush that framed the edge of the valley. The sun had already begun to dip behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the empty land where the old trail wound like a faded scar through the prairie grass. It was the kind of evening when the world seemed to hold its breath, when even the crickets paused between their calls. Somewhere in the distance a coyote cried, its voice rising thin and lonely, echoing across the plains. That sound carried over to a lone cowboy riding slowly toward the horizon, his horse's hooves muffled in the dust. He wasn't heading anywhere in particular, only away from the weight of everything that had happened behind him. His name was Cole, a man who had seen too much for 30 winters. His eyes had that hollow look that came from losing things you couldn't ever get back. Family, land, and maybe a bit of his own soul. The frontier had a way of doing that to people. It stripped you bare, tested what was left of your heart, and didn't care whether you broke or not. He'd worked ranches, trailed cattle across the open country, fought men who were quicker with a gun, and lived through storms that tore the sky open. But all of it, every mile and every scar, had never prepared him for what he found that evening in the dying light. Down by the creek that cut through the valley, he saw smoke, a thin line rising between the cottonwoods. It was too low and steady for lightning fire, too small for a camp meant for cowhands. He slowed his horse, watching for movement, one hand resting on the worn grip of his revolver. He'd learned not to trust much of what the land offered, especially this close to the old Comanche hunting range. The wars might have quieted some, but out here, quiet didn't always mean peace. When he reached the creek, he dismounted and led his horse down the bank. The smell of smoke mingled with the scent of damp earth and burned leather. That's when he saw her, lying by the water's edge, her dark hair tangled and wet, a torn blanket clutched around her shoulders. Her breathing was ragged and there were bruises along her arms. She looked young, maybe no more than 20. She wasn't dressed like any settler girl. The beads on the edge of the blanket, the cut of her dress beneath it. It told him what she was before he even stepped closer. A Comanche girl. He froze for a moment, unsure whether to move forward or ride away. He'd heard stories about what could happen to a white man found near one of their own. Yet something about her, how she tried to lift her head, how her eyes met his even in her weakness, pulled him in despite every warning whispering in his mind. "Don't be afraid," he said quietly, kneeling beside her. "I ain't here to hurt you." Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but her voice came out soft, broken. "Please don't." She couldn't finish. She winced as she tried to pull the blanket tighter, shivering though the evening air wasn't that cold. Cole saw then that she was bleeding, not from a wound of his making but from something crueler, something done long before he arrived. He took off his hat and set it down beside him, his jaw tightening. "You're hurt bad. You need help." She shook her head weakly. No town. "They'll kill me." He didn't answer right away. He'd seen how the folks in nearby towns talked about Indians, how fast anger turned into fear and fear into hate. The girl wasn't wrong. If he brought her into any of those towns, she wouldn't stand a chance. Yet if he left her here, she wouldn't live through the night. The creek water rippled, catching the fading light. He looked around, listening to the rustle of the cottonwoods. There was no sound of horses, no sign of anyone else nearby. Whoever had left her here hadn't planned on coming back. Cole tore a strip from his shirt and dipped it in the creek. "I'll clean the wound," he said, his voice low. She tensed when he reached for her arm, clutching the blanket tighter. "Please, don't remove." She tried to pull away, her voice catching. "Please don't remove my clothes." He stopped, his hand halfway between them, realizing then what she thought he meant to do. He felt a sick twist in his gut, shame cutting through him like a blade. "No, ma'am," he said quickly. "I ain't that kind of man." The fear in her eyes made him feel smaller than he'd ever felt before. It reminded him of how broken the world had become, how trust was something too fragile to exist between two souls who should have been enemies. He moved slower then, careful, cleaning only the blood from her arm and shoulder. When he was done, he wrapped her in his coat. "You'll be all right. I'll take you somewhere safe." But her gaze stayed on him, as if she was trying to read what kind of man he really was. "Why?" she whispered. "Why help me?" Cole looked toward the darkening horizon. "Because someone's got to." He lifted her gently onto his horse, feeling how light she was, and mounted behind her. As they rode, he could hear her breathing steady, but her head rested weakly against his chest. He didn't know where to take her yet, only that he couldn't let her die out there in the dirt. Night had fallen by the time he reached his small cabin up in the foothills. The place was nothing more than a roof and a wood stove, but it was far enough from town that no one came asking questions. He carried her inside, laid her on the cot and lit a lantern. The glow flickered over her face. Brown skin, delicate features, eyes that told of long miles and loss. He'd seen pain before, but not like this. This kind of pain didn't come from battle or sickness. It came from the way people treated each other. He made a fire, heated water, and brewed a bit of willow bark tea like his mother had taught him long ago. As she sipped, she watched him with wary eyes. "You live alone," she said faintly. "Been that way a while," he answered. "Safer that way," she nodded slowly. "I am called Taya," she said at last, voice almost a whisper. He gave a small nod. "Taya," he repeated softly. "You can rest here. I'll keep watch." But rest didn't come easily for either of them that night. Cole sat by the fire, staring into the flames, wondering what kind of men had done this to her. And why. Out there, in that empty land, violence had become a language too many understood. It didn't care for reasons, only results. He thought about the wars, the raids, the broken promises that had driven the Comanche from their lands. He thought about the people who'd called it progress, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something stirring deep inside. Something between guilt and anger. Something that made his hands shake. Near dawn, Taya stirred, murmuring something in her tongue. Her voice was soft, but her words carried pain. He moved closer, thinking she might be fevered. But then she reached out and caught his wrist. "They'll come," she whispered, eyes opening wide. "They'll come for me. And for you." Cole felt the weight of her words settle like stone. He looked toward the door, toward the horizon just beginning to pale with morning. Somewhere out there, someone was hunting her. Maybe soldiers, maybe men from a nearby ranch. Whoever they were, they'd stop at nothing to silence what she'd seen, or what she knew. He didn't say a word, just pulled his revolver from his belt and checked the chamber. The old gun gleamed faintly in the light of the fire. "Then we best be ready," he said quietly. Outside, the wind began to rise again, sweeping across the valley, bending the grass as though the land itself knew that something dark was coming. And in that still moment, the cowboy realized that helping her had already changed everything. Whatever happened next, there'd be no turning back. The first light of morning spilled through the cracks in the cabin walls, thin as the edges of a knife. Cole sat by the cold ashes of the fire, his hat pulled low, eyes red from a night without sleep. Outside, the world looked still, but his gut told him stillness could be a lie. The land had that quiet before a storm kind of feeling, when even the birds refused to sing. He listened for the sound of hooves, the distant echo of voices. Anything that would tell him trouble was on its way. Taya slept fitfully on the cot, wrapped tight in his old coat. Every now and then she murmured something under her breath, words he couldn't understand. He'd tried to rest, but his thoughts kept circling the same tracks. Who had hurt her, why she'd been left by the creek, and what she meant when she said they would come for both of them. He'd lived most of his life trusting his instincts, and those instincts now told him that saving her had set something dangerous in motion. By mid-morning, he saddled his horse and checked his rifle. The trail behind the cabin was still empty, the valley below untouched. He gathered a few supplies, a bit of jerky, coffee, and his small pouch of tobacco, and started a fire again to make breakfast. When Taya woke, she blinked at him as though she had forgotten where she was. Her face softened a little when she saw the steaming tin cup he held out to her. "You drink," he said quietly. "It'll help." She took it with both hands, sipping carefully. The warmth brought color back to her cheeks, though her eyes still carried that faraway look of someone who had seen too much too soon. Cole sat down across from her, his back against the wall. "You said someone was coming for you," he began. "Who are they?" She hesitated, eyes drifting toward the window as if afraid to say too much. "Men," she said finally. "White men. They took me from my people." His jaw tightened. "Why?" She looked down at the cup, her fingers trembling slightly. "I don't know their reason. They said they needed a guide, to find something in the hills. But when I tried to run, they—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I ran for 2 days before I reached the creek. They'll track me soon." Cole stared into the fire, piecing her words together. He'd heard whispers before, rumors of treasure buried near the old Spanish ruins north of the valley. Miners and soldiers both had searched, some never came back. Greed had a way of turning men into monsters. If those men were after something in those hills, they'd kill anyone who got in the way. He exhaled slowly, the weight of it heavy in his chest. You got family still with your people? She nodded faintly. Far to the south. My brother leads what is left of our band. We move often. Too many soldiers near the rivers now. Cole leaned back, rubbing his temples. It ain't safe to take you that far. Not yet anyway. Taya's eyes flicked up to meet his. You should leave me then. They will kill you too. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Maybe. But I ain't the kind to walk away from someone needing help. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the bitter scent filling the room. Besides, I've already done worse things in this life. Maybe helping you is one right thing left for me to do. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft hiss of the fire and the wind brushing against the door. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Cole stepped outside to chop wood. He needed something to keep his hands busy, to quiet the thoughts clawing at his mind. Each swing of the axe echoed through the valley, sharp and steady. Every so often he stopped to glance toward the ridge, half expecting to see riders cresting the hill. But the only movement was a hawk circling high above, its shadow drifting across the ground like a warning. Inside, Taya wandered to the window, watching him. There was something in his way of moving, cautious yet strong, that told her he wasn't like the others she'd seen. Still, she didn't trust him fully. Trust wasn't something easily given, not after what she'd been through. Yet there was something in his eyes when he looked at her, something that felt real. When he came back in, she asked quietly, "Why do you live alone?" He set down the axe and wiped his hands on his trousers. "Ain't much reason to be around people anymore," he said. "Had a small ranch once. Wife, little boy. But fever came through 5 years back. Took them both." Her face softened with sympathy. "I am sorry," he nodded, staring at the floor. "So was I. After that, the land didn't feel like home no more. I sold what I could and came up here. Been drifting ever since." She hesitated, then said softly, "Maybe now you have reason again." He looked up at her, not sure how to answer. There was honesty in her tone that caught him off guard. But before he could speak, a faint sound cut through the silence, a distant echo of horses. Both of them froze. Cole moved to the window, his eyes narrowing. The sound was faint but steady. "Riders," he whispered. 2, maybe 3, Taya's breath quickened. "It's them." He grabbed his rifle and blew out the lantern. "Get behind the wall. Don't move till I say." She obeyed without question, crouching low as he stepped to the door and eased it open. The air outside was dry, carrying dust and the faint scent of sage. Down the trail, 2 riders appeared, moving slow, scanning the valley. Their shapes were distant, but Cole could see enough to know they weren't ranchers or drifters. They rode with purpose, eyes sharp, rifles strapped across their saddles. He closed the door quietly and turned back to Taya. "They found the trail. What will you do?" she whispered. "Try and make 'em believe no one's here. If that don't work..." He loaded his rifle and gave her a steady look. "Then we fight." The riders drew closer, and soon their voices carried through the still air. Cole caught bits of their words, searching, "Tracks, girl." He knew then there was no denying what they were after. His stomach twisted with anger. They circled the cabin, calling out. "Anyone home?" One of them shouted. "We're looking for a runaway." "Might have come this way." Cole stood by the door, silent. When they called again, louder this time, he finally answered. "Ain't seen anyone out here," he said, voice steady. One of the men laughed. "That's so. Mind if we take a look?" "I do mind," Cole said, stepping out into the open. The men stopped their horses a few yards away. They were rough-looking, both wearing army coats turned civilian. One had a scar running from his chin to his neck. The scarred man eyed Cole up and down. "You're a long way from town, friend." "Same could be said for you," Cole replied. The second man leaned forward in his saddle. "We're tracking a Comanche woman. She's dangerous. Stole from our camp." "You sure you ain't seen her?" Cole's jaw clenched, but he shook his head. "Ain't seen a soul but coyotes." The men exchanged glances. The scarred one spat into the dirt. "Well, if you do, best send word to Fort Mason. There's a reward for her." "I'll keep that in mind," Cole said coolly. They turned their horses slowly, still watching him, and rode off toward the ridge. He stayed there until the sound of hooves faded into the wind. Only then did he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Inside, Taya stepped from the shadows, her face pale. "They will come back," she said. "I know," he replied, setting his rifle down. "That's why we'll be gone before they do." She looked uncertain. Where will we go? South, he said. Toward your people, she shook her head. It's far. You will die if they follow. He gave her a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Wouldn't be the first time I've outrun death. That night, they packed what little they could carry. The fire burned low, throwing their shadows long against the cabin walls. Cole tightened the saddle straps, glancing around one last time. The cabin had been his refuge for years, a place to hide from the world. Now it would become just another memory left behind. As they rode out beneath the cover of darkness, the moonlight touched the land in pale silver. Taya sat behind him, silent, her arms loosely around his waist. The night air was cold, carrying the scent of pine and dust. Ahead lay the wild country, untamed, unforgiving, and full of secrets. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. Behind them, miles away, two riders stood by the ridge watching faint hoofprints disappear into the valley. One of them smiled. We got him now, he muttered. And as the wind picked up again, carrying the faint echo of that laughter, the land seemed to whisper a warning. Something dark was following, and the worst was yet to come. The wind howled low through the ravine as the night deepened, wrapping the land in darkness so thick that the stars seemed to burn brighter just to be seen. Cole rode in silence, his horse's steady gait the only sound breaking through the endless rustle of dry grass. Taya clung to him lightly, her head resting near his shoulder, though he could feel the tension in her body with every uneven breath she took. They had been riding for hours, putting as much distance between themselves and the cabin as the night would allow. But even with the miles behind them, Cole couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. He kept glancing over his shoulder, eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing but shadows, but he knew men like the ones who'd come to the cabin, they didn't give up easy. The promise of gold or a bounty could turn a man stubborn, and stubborn men were dangerous. When dawn came, the light broke slow and thin across the hills, painting everything in a dull copper glow. Cole reined in the horse near a cluster of rocks, where the land dipped into a narrow canyon. A thin stream trickled through it, hidden beneath cottonwoods. We'll rest here, he said. Taya slid down from the horse, wincing slightly as her feet touched the ground. She'd said little since they left, but now her eyes scanned the open stretch behind them, her face drawn tight with worry. Do you think they followed? She asked softly. Cole crouched by the stream, splashing cold water on his face before answering. If they did, they'll have to move careful. Hard to track over stone. He looked up at her, his tone softer. You need rest, Taya. You're no good to anyone if you fall from that horse. She nodded, but her gaze lingered on the horizon. They will come. Men like that do not stop, he didn't argue. Instead, he set about making a small fire hidden under the trees using dry brush and a few branches. The scent of smoke drifted faintly through the air, mingling with the sharp scent of pine. He brewed coffee and handed her a cup, then tore a piece of jerky in half and gave her a share. For a while, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them was heavy, filled with things neither dared say out loud. Cole watched her as she ate slowly. She moved with a kind of cautious grace, like a creature used to watching for danger in every shadow. The bruises on her arms were fading now, but he could still see the weariness behind her eyes. After a long silence, she asked, "Why did you not turn me in?" They said there was a reward. He gave a faint, humorless smile. Because I don't much care for the kind of men who hang posters like that. And because I've done enough wrong in my life to know when something's right. Her eyes softened a little. You have a good heart, cowboy. He looked away toward the canyon wall. Maybe once. Not sure what's left of it now. The fire crackled quietly between them. Overhead, the sky began to cloud, gray and heavy. A storm was brewing. Cole stood, his instincts stirring. We'll move again before dark. If they're tracking, the rain will wash the trail. Taya rose too, pulling his coat tighter around her shoulders. Where will we go? There's an old trading post up near Eagle Pass, abandoned years ago. We can lay low there till I figure the next move. She nodded, trusting him now in a way that hadn't come easy. As afternoon passed, the first drops of rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady and cold. They saddled up again, the horse pushing through the mud as thunder rolled across the open land. The rain turned the sky to silver, washing the world clean but making every step harder. Cole led the horse on foot through narrow trails, his boots sinking deep into the earth. By nightfall, they reached the foothills. The ruins of the trading post came into view, just a few crumbling walls, a collapsed roof, and an old corral overtaken by weeds. It wasn't much, but it offered shelter. Cole helped Taya down and guided her inside. The place smelled of rot and dust. The roof leaked in spots, and spiders had claimed the corners, but it was dry enough to light a small fire. The light flickered over the broken boards, revealing faded signs painted in a language neither of them could read. Cole found a few old crates and stacked them near the wall, making a rough seat. He took off his wet coat and hung it near the fire. "We'll stay here till morning," he said. "If no one's on our trail, we head south at first light." Taya sat close to the fire, rubbing her hands together. Her eyes reflected the glow, bright and weary. "You think they will stop looking?" He hesitated. "No," he said quietly. "Men like that don't quit, but I've dealt with their kind before." "What do they want?" she asked. "Why chase so far?" He looked into the fire, watching the sparks twist and fade. "You said they were looking for something in the hills. What was it, Taya?" She hesitated, her face turning away. "They called it the silver of the ancients. A treasure buried in the sacred land of my people. I do not know if it's real." "Only stories." Cole's expression darkened. "Stories like that get men killed. There's nothing greedier than a man who thinks he's owed something from the earth." "They killed my uncle," she whispered. When he would not show them the trail, he felt a deep ache twist in his chest. "Then we make sure they don't find you again." Thunder cracked outside, rattling the old beams. The rain came harder, slamming against the roof. Cole went to the doorway, staring out into the storm. The darkness beyond the firelight seemed alive, shifting, whispering through the rain. Then faintly, he saw it. A flicker of movement. He stiffened, hand going to his gun. A second flash of lightning lit the land, and this time he saw what his gut already knew. Horses, 3 of them, moving slow along the ridge, their silhouettes black against the sky. He turned quickly. "They found us," he said. Taya's breath caught. "What do we do?" "Hide," he said sharply, grabbing his rifle. "Stay behind the wall. Don't move." She obeyed without argument, slipping into the shadows as Cole crouched by the door, rifle ready. Rain hammered against his hat brim, dripping down his face. The riders came closer, voices carried faintly on the wind. Cole could hear laughter, rough and cruel. "Search the place," one of them shouted.
"If she's here, I want her alive."
Cole's jaw tightened. He could see them clearly now. 3 men, the same ones from before, and a 4th trailing behind. One of them dismounted, approaching the doorway with a lantern raised high. Cole waited, his heart beat loud in his ears. The moment the man stepped inside, lightning flashed again, illuminating his scarred face. Cole moved fast. He grabbed the man by the collar and yanked him inside, slamming the door shut behind him. The struggle was short but violent. The rifle cracked once, echoing through the storm, and the man went down hard, the lantern spilling oil across the dirt floor. Outside, the other riders shouted, scrambling for cover. "He's in there! Light him up!" Bullets tore through the wooden walls, splintering the air. Taya gasped, crouching low as dust rained from the ceiling. Cole fired back once, hitting one of the lanterns outside and plunging the world into near darkness. For a few moments, there was only silence, broken by rain and thunder. Then came the sound of retreating hooves. The riders had pulled back, regrouping in the dark. Cole wiped blood from his temple and turned to Taya. "You all right?" She nodded shakily. "Yes, you saved me again." He shook his head. "We ain't out of this yet." He reloaded the rifle, staring toward the door. "They'll be back when the storm breaks. Next time there'll be more of them." Taya looked at him with fear and something else, a spark of trust, maybe even hope. "Then we run again?" He hesitated, his eyes distant. "Maybe, or maybe we stop running." She frowned. "You mean to fight?" Cole looked back at the body on the ground, his expression grim. "They won't stop till one of us is gone. I've been running my whole life, from loss, from guilt, from everything I couldn't fix. Maybe it's time that ends here." The fire flickered low, shadows stretching long across the cracked floorboards. Outside, the storm raged on, and the sound of thunder rolled over the hills like distant drums. Taya moved closer, her voice soft. "Then I stay. If they take me, they win. My people lose again. But if we stand, maybe the spirits will guide us." Cole looked at her, something steady returning to his eyes. "Then we'll stand." They sat together in silence, listening to the storm. Every gust of wind rattled the old timbers. Every flash of lightning revealed a world on the edge of chaos. Somewhere beyond that darkness, men were waiting, planning, hunting, and as the fire burned low, Cole knew the battle ahead would test not just his strength, but his soul. He didn't know if they'd survive it. But he knew one thing for certain, There was no turning back anymore. The storm outside raged on, wild and merciless, as if the land itself knew that something bigger than either of them had already begun. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the valley washed in pale sunlight and streaks of mist that curled like smoke across the hills. Cole and Taya had spent the night in uneasy silence, the body of the man he had subdued lying in the corner as a grim reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond the ruins. The quiet didn't comfort them, it was a warning. Somewhere out there the others were regrouping, planning, watching, and Cole knew they would be back. They mounted the horse in the early light, moving cautiously through the broken trails of the abandoned trading post. The mud had hardened, making every hoofstep echo faintly against the canyon walls. Taya rode behind him, her hands clenching his coat with quiet determination. She wasn't just a passenger. She was alert, scanning the land with eyes sharpened by fear and survival. Cole could feel it, her awareness, her readiness. She had survived this far through cunning, not luck, and he had learned quickly that underestimating her would be a mistake. "Keep close," he said quietly. "If they've tracked us, the valley's our advantage. Narrow passes, high rocks, we can use them." She nodded, her jaw tight. "I can help." He glanced back at her, seeing the resolve there. It reminded him of his own youth, of days spent learning to survive on his father's ranch, when every mistake cost more than pride. It could cost life. "I know," he said, "just trust me, all right?" They moved through the canyon slowly, every shadow and movement scrutinized. The valley was quiet now, but quiet was no measure of safety. Cole knew better than to assume the storm had washed away all traces of pursuit. Men like the ones chasing Taya had patience, and greed made them relentless. By midday, they reached a small rise that gave a view of the open prairie beyond. Cole halted the horse and signaled Taya to stay low. Through the haze, he could make out figures in the distance. Riders, their dark shapes moving steadily, scanning the ground. They were 3 now, but he had no doubt reinforcements would follow. "They're close," he whispered. "They've been tracking every hoofprint. We'll have to move carefully from here." Taya swallowed, her hands gripping his shoulders lightly. "We can't outrun them forever," she said. "No," he agreed. "But we can make them pay for every step if they try to take us." They descended into a narrow ravine that led to an overgrown trail winding toward the hills. Cole had been here once before, scouting land for a distant ranch. The place was rugged, full of hidden dips and sharp rocks, a trap if used correctly. He slowed the horse, moving them through carefully, each step measured. Hours passed. The sun dipped low again, painting the valley in orange and purple shadows. Cole could feel the tension building in the air, thick as the dust kicked up by the trail. Taya shifted nervously behind him. "Do you think they know we're ahead of them?" "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not. Doesn't matter. All that matters is what we do if they catch up." By evening, they reached a narrow canyon that cut sharply into the hills, the walls high and jagged. Cole led the horse carefully, knowing the riders would have a hard time following through this terrain. It was dangerous, yes, but it favored the one who knew the land. He dismounted to inspect a section where the trail forked. One path climbed steeply along a ridge. The other led down into a dry creek bed. Cole studied the ground, noting the old hoofprints and broken twigs. "We'll take the ridge," he decided. "They'll try the easier path and we'll have the high ground." Taya followed, climbing carefully. Every step was an effort, the loose rocks sliding beneath their boots. The wind whipped across the canyon, carrying the scent of dust and sage, and somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of hooves echoed, a reminder that the hunters were never far behind. As night fell, they found a small outcropping that offered cover. Cole built a small fire, enough to warm them but not enough to draw attention. Taya huddled close, wrapping her arms around herself. "I can't believe we're still alive," she whispered. Cole looked at her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "We're not out of this yet," he said. "And I won't lie, it's going to get worse before it gets better." She didn't flinch at the words. Instead, she reached out and touched his arm lightly. "Then we'll face it together." He felt a strange warmth at that, a faint reminder of hope he hadn't allowed himself in years, but he quickly pushed it aside. Hope was dangerous out here. It could get you killed. Hours later, he was keeping watch while Taya slept fitfully. The night was alive with sounds, the cry of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of the river, and then he heard it. A soft, deliberate snapping of a twig. Cole's hand went to his rifle. He slipped into the shadows, moving toward the noise with careful steps. From behind a boulder he saw a figure, one of the men from before scouting ahead, moving cautiously as if aware of the danger lurking unseen. Cole held his breath, watching. The man carried a lantern, its light faint but enough to reveal the intent in his stance. This was no accidental wanderer. He was hunting, looking for them. Cole stepped closer, keeping low, ready to strike if necessary. But then the man paused, scanning the ridge below. He called out softly, almost to himself. "She's here somewhere. I can feel it." Cole's jaw tightened. He could hear the others approaching now, their horses clattering against rocks, the sound echoing through the canyon. This was it. Their presence confirmed, the hunters closing in. He crept back to Taya, who had woken during the sound of the horses. "They're here," he said quietly. "We have to move. Now." She scrambled to her feet, fear and determination flickering across her face. "Where?" "Through the ridge," he said. "There's a cave up ahead. It'll hide us, at least for a while. But we need to hurry." They moved quickly, the fire reduced to embers behind them. Cole led the horse carefully, every step measured. The canyon walls rose high, jagged and dark, and the narrow trail forced them to stay low and silent. The first rider appeared at the base of the canyon, calling out, voice echoing. Cole ducked low, holding Taya close. The second followed, scanning the rocks. The third lingered, hesitant, sensing something was wrong. Cole pressed them forward, urging the horse toward the cave entrance he had spotted earlier. They reached it just as the first shots rang out, bullets tearing into rock and dirt around them. Cole dismounted quickly, helping Taya inside. The cave was small but deep, dark and cool. Inside, they were hidden from sight, but the sound of the riders searching above echoed against the walls. Taya sank to the ground, trembling. "They'll find us," she whispered. Cole knelt beside her, checking her for injuries. "Not if we stay quiet," he said. "And they might not expect us to go this far. This is their mistake. They think the easy trail leads to us. They don't know we've learned the land like they don't." Outside, the riders' voices grew louder, closer. "Spread out!" one of them shouted. "They can't have gone far." Cole could feel his pulse quickening. The men were methodical, experienced. One wrong move and they'd be exposed. Taya held her breath beside him, eyes wide in the dim light of the cave. The wind carried the sound of hooves and shouts through the narrow canyon. Cole could hear one of the men climbing toward the ridge above, flashlight swinging in slow arcs. The shadows cast by the lantern flickered over the walls, and he could feel Taya trembling beside him. He whispered, "Steady. Wait for my signal." Hours seemed to pass in tense silence. The riders searched methodically, unaware of the cave below. Cole's muscles ached from holding still, from gripping the rifle so tightly, from the fear gnawing at the edges of his mind. Finally, the voices began to recede, moving down the canyon. Cole didn't move, waiting until the sound of hooves had faded completely. Taya exhaled slowly, relief washing over her features. Cole looked at her, sweat and grime streaking his face. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "They'll be back. And next time, they won't be alone." Her eyes met his, fear and resolve mixing in a dangerous cocktail. "Then we'll fight," she said softly. He nodded. "We have no choice, but we'll need a plan, and we'll need allies." Outside, the canyon lay quiet again, but the tension in the air remained. The riders were out there watching, waiting. Somewhere beyond the hills, reinforcements were surely gathering. Cole knew the coming days would test everything he had, his courage, his skill, and the bond he had forged with Taya. They were still alive, but only just. And the valley around them, beautiful and wild, had already begun to feel like a trap. Cole pressed his back to the cave wall, scanning the faint light outside. His hand hovered over the rifle, ready. Taya sat beside him, silent but alert. The storm of pursuit had passed, but a darker storm was coming, one that would force them to fight, or lose everything. And in the shadows of the canyon, the valley seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the clash that was inevitable. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine from the storm that had finally passed. Cole and Taya waited in the cave until the sun climbed high enough to cast light over the canyon walls. The riders had not returned during the night, and for the first time in days the valley seemed still in a way that felt real rather than threatening. Cole cautiously led the horse to the edge of the cave, peering down the trail. No one was there. "Looks quiet," he said, though his tone was wary. Taya slid off behind him, her face tense but calm. "For now," she said. "We cannot linger." Cole nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. They had come this far, survived ambushes, storms, and relentless pursuit. Now they had to reach her people before the hunters regrouped. He glanced at her and saw not just fear in her eyes, but determination, a resilience that mirrored his own. Together, they would endure what remained of this dangerous land. They moved cautiously down the ridge, the horse picking its way through loose rocks and narrow trails. Cole led, keeping the terrain between them and any potential pursuers, knowing the hills were their greatest advantage if danger returned. Taya followed, her hand resting lightly on the horse's flank, eyes scanning every shadow, every crevice. Hours passed in tense silence. Occasionally they'd pause, and Cole would crouch low to inspect the trail. Some tracks indicated others had been here recently, but there was no sign the hunters had followed the same path. The relief was small, fleeting, but it allowed them to breathe just enough to keep moving. By afternoon, they reached a hidden grove, a small oasis of water and shade. Cole guided the horse to the stream, letting it drink while he and Taya sat on a fallen log. For the first time in days, they allowed themselves a brief rest. "You saved me," Taya said quietly, her voice barely rising above the gentle rustle of leaves. "More than once. I do not know how to repay you." Cole shook his head. "Don't owe me nothing. You survive, that's enough." She studied him, eyes softening. "But you risked everything for me." "A stranger," he looked away, his jaw tight. "Maybe I'm tired of watching the world take what it wants from people without consequence." Taya nodded slowly, understanding more than he realized. "You have a good heart. I have seen it." They stayed only a short while, knowing lingering could bring danger. Cole mounted first, helping Taya onto the horse behind him. Together they pressed on, the trail leading toward the south and the lands of her people. Night fell again as they approached a ridge overlooking a wide river. Cole dismounted to scout ahead while Taya waited, shivering from fatigue in the chill air. Across the water, lights flickered faintly, small fires in the distance. He knew instantly what they were, her people, camped along the river for safety, moving as they always did to avoid detection. Relief washed over him. At last, the danger of isolation would end. He returned to Taya, guiding the horse down the trail carefully. As they crossed the river at a shallow ford, the current cold and fast, Taya leaned forward, gripping him tightly. "We are almost home," he said quietly. The opposite bank revealed a small camp nestled among cottonwoods. Figures moved carefully, children and elders alike. The sight of her people living in cautious harmony with the land brought tears to her eyes. She murmured prayers of gratitude in her tongue, and Cole felt the significance of the moment without needing translation. Cole helped her from the horse. She ran ahead a few steps, then stopped and turned back to him. "Come," she said. "They will protect you." He hesitated. He had been alone for so long, used to guarding only himself. But something in her expression, and in the quiet acceptance of the people waiting for her, told him he belonged here now as more than a shadowed figure in the hills. He followed. The elders approached first, cautious but welcoming. Taya knelt in respect, and then one by one they came to greet Cole. There was an understanding in their eyes, a recognition of the courage it took to protect one of their own. One elder, a man with a weathered face and sharp eyes, spoke to Taya. She answered, then turned to Cole. "They call you friend," she said softly. Cole gave a small nod, unsure if he deserved the title. I did what I could." The elder stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "More than enough. You saved her life. You carry honor with you now." Taya's people welcomed them, sharing food and warmth by the fires. Cole sat quietly, observing the community's gentle routines, the way they lived in balance with the land, always alert but calm. He realized then that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about protecting what mattered, building trust and carrying courage in the face of relentless threat. Over the next days, Taya rejoined her people fully, helping with small tasks and tending to the camp. Cole remained nearby, still cautious, still aware that the men hunting them had not vanished entirely. He took the opportunity to learn more about her people, their customs, their stories of resilience and their sacred lands. Each tale strengthened his resolve, reminded him why he had risked so much to protect her. One evening, as the sun set over the river, Taya approached him. She carried a small bundle of herbs and water. "You should rest," she said. "You have not slept in many nights." Cole took the offering with a faint smile. "A little sleep sounds good." She sat beside him, looking out across the river. "I feared you would leave me once this was done," she said quietly. He looked at her, understanding more in that moment than words could convey. "I ain't going anywhere," he said. "Not now. Not ever." For the first time in years, Cole allowed himself to relax, feeling the weight of solitude lift slightly. He knew the past could not be changed, and the losses he carried would remain. But here among these people and with Taya, he found a sense of belonging he had long thought impossible. Days passed and no trace of the hunters appeared. Cole scouted the nearby hills occasionally, ensuring no unexpected threats approached. But each day that passed without danger brought a sense of security. Taya's people taught him small lessons about the land, the plants and the old trails, and in turn, he shared what he had learned from years of living in the wild, tracking, survival, and caution. One afternoon, they stood together at the edge of a bluff overlooking the valley, where the storm had first driven them toward each other. The land stretched wide and open, golden with late summer grass framed by rugged hills. "You saved me," Taya said softly, resting a hand on his arm. "And you brought me back to them." "I cannot thank you enough," Cole shook his head. "You did the hard part. I just followed." She smiled faintly, her eyes shining. "No, you did more than follow. You chose to fight, to protect. That is what matters." He looked at the horizon, thinking of the hunters, of the hardships, and of all that had led them here. "This land," he said quietly, "it changes you, strips you down to what's real. You survive or you do not. But what I've learned is worth more than any gold they were chasing. You can't take honor, courage, or trust from the land. You have to earn it." Taya nodded, her expression solemn but full of hope. "And we did. Together." The two of them stood in silence, letting the wind carry away the tension and fear that had clung to them for so long. Around them the valley seemed at peace, the river flowing steady and sure, the hills standing firm against the sky. The past, with its threats and violence, would remain part of their story, but it no longer dictated their present. Cole realized then that the journey had changed him in ways he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. He had found trust in another, courage in moments of fear, and a sense of belonging he had long thought lost. Taya had survived, yes, but they had survived together, and in that shared survival lay a truth more valuable than any treasure the hunters had sought. As the sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows across the valley, Cole and Taya walked toward the camp side by side. The elders greeted them with quiet smiles, children ran past, and the river whispered its steady song. The danger of the hunters was not forgotten, but it had been left behind for now. Cole looked at Taya, seeing not just the Comanche girl he had protected, but the resilient woman she had always been. "We'll be safe here," he said. "For now," she replied. He nodded, knowing the world beyond the valley could still be cruel, but also knowing that courage, trust, and resilience were theirs to carry wherever they went. The night fell gently, the stars bright and clear above, and for the first time in a long time the valley felt like home. And as Cole and Taya sat by the fire, listening to the river and the soft voices of her people, they allowed themselves to believe that the worst had passed, and that together, they could face whatever came next. The wind whispered across the hills, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. In the quiet, there was understanding, there was trust, and there was the unspoken bond between two souls who had survived the harshest of trials. The valley held them now, and for the first time it felt as though the land itself was on their side. They did not speak of the past further. There was no need. Survival, courage, and trust had spoken louder than any words could. And in the stillness of the night, Cole allowed himself a rare, honest smile. Taya leaned against him, safe at last. And for the first time in years, he felt the weight of the world lift just enough to breathe easy. The journey had ended, but the lessons of the land, the struggle, and the bond they shared would carry on, stronger than any threat, brighter than any fear, and more enduring than the storms that had once threatened to break them.